Hello, everyone. I'm here today to talk about short-term rentals. This is a big topic all over the world, and probably you know as Airbnb or using Booking.com or any other platform. The fact is, you can put your flat there, your house there, or your room, and you rent that property via the different platforms. Some other operators have been building their own platform, but the bottom line is there is a new way of traveling around, new way of visiting cities. And we are here today to understand the size of the market, the level of occupancy, price, market conditions. And for that, I have here as a guest a speaker today, James Lane. James Lane is the Chief Economist for AirDNA. AirDNA is a leading platform when it comes to the numbers for Airbnb. You guys know pretty much everything. James, thank you very much for being here today. Pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, excited to be here and dig into the data. It's a uh, fast-growing industry. It's evolved so much over the past 10 years that I've been studying it, and excited to share some of the trends that we're seeing.
Fantastic. James, before we go into different questions, can you give a proper overview of AirDNA? You have been active on this field for 10 years, so you have accumulated a lot of information and analysis. But can you tell us also about AirDNA?
Yeah, so AirDNA started in 2014, so just now 11 years old. And it was really started by our founder in his garage in Santa Monica. And he was operating six short-term rentals in the city of Santa Monica and looking to try to figure out where to add his next one. And he thought that there would be data to support sort of future investments, and he went about collecting that data. So he's looking at all rentals around California. What were they renting for? And trying to ascertain how much they were being booked, like what it was the occupants of each of those listings. So he started with his dad in their garage. They figured out how to collect data for all the properties across the US on Airbnb. They then figured out how to marry that data with listings on Verbo. Now they've figured out how to collect data off of Booking. So really what we've been trying to do is create a holistic view of the short-term rental industry around the world. What is every single listing out there? What are the platforms that they're listing on? And then how much are they getting booked? What rate are they getting booked for? And how much revenue are they generating through time? So that we can provide that data for investors. We can provide that data for hosts to figure out and what any home around the world could earn as a short-term rental, what the seasonality is of that market, what are the attributes of properties that are causing some to do really well and others to not do very well, and make that data readily accessible for any investor around the world, no matter what market they're looking at bringing a market or listing online in.
Perfect. Yeah, I have been inside of your platform, and it's quite amazing how you can cross information and find out everything. That's why I invited here to be interviewed today because I think a lot of our members would like to know more about this industry. Let's talk about the market overview. Let's talk about let's talk global first. I'm sure we
Yep.
can drill down in different parts of the world, but talking about the global short-term rental, how would you describe the current state of the global short-term rental market?
Yeah. And it's been a wild ride the past 5 years. So I'm clearly, and we went through a global pandemic over the past 5 years. In 2020, travel essentially came to a stop. Um, and many countries shut down their borders. Many short-term rental operators went out of business. We saw a massive supply decline. So the number of listings that people were making available and decreased substantially. People that had second homes wanted to use those second homes. People that were taking vacations to cities stopped. People that were traveling for business stopped. If you had maybe an apartment or a flat that you were using for short-term rental, maybe you switched it to long-term rental. So that caused a shock to the business. And then throughout the end of 2022 and 2021, travel started to happen again. And what we saw that was people were much more comfortable staying in a home than they were a hotel. And this, I think, really accelerated growth in our industry. It allowed short-term rentals to be tried for the first time for many people that maybe wouldn't have tried short-term rentals for a decade or more into the future. So I think it really pulled forward and accelerated growth, accelerated adoption in the sector. Uh, and then it also spread demand for short-term rentals outside of major cities. So if you looked at Airbnb, Booking.com's business pre-COVID, it was almost entirely located in the major population centers
Hmm.
around the world. So New York, Paris, London, Hong Kong, Sao Paulo. Like you look at the major cities around the world, that's where primarily short-term rentals were. And all of a sudden, people wanted to travel outside of the major cities. They wanted to explore the countryside. They wanted to go to parks. They wanted to go to small cities. And it created new demand, and we've seen the supply really fill in to accommodate it. So most of the growth we've seen for short-term rentals over the past 3 or 4 years has been outside of the major cities. Um, and it's really taken off. So fast forward and 5 years post-pandemic for the short-term rental industry, overall listings are up substantially. Whether it's in the US, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in South or Latin America, like we've seen massive growth. And a lot of that is Americans, Europeans traveling around the world. It's different countries around the world seeing more adoption for domestic travel, whether it's cheaper or more convenient for family or group travel. And uh, we're really seeing this segment mature into maybe what was seen as alternative accommodations, maybe pre-pandemic, as really a lot of people's primary way of travel now today.
Fantastic. Very interesting. Which markets are showing signs of saturation or oversupply, and which ones still show healthy growth potential?
Yeah. So I don't love the term saturation, just because I believe that the overall market is growing at such a great rate that it's hard for a market to be oversaturated. And there may be listings that aren't sort of adapting to what guests want today, like the listing that someone is renting, maybe a private room in a flat in Boston, where you're sharing a room and may not be as attractive to the type of listings people are adding today. But the markets that are more mature in terms of short-term rental growth are areas like the US, the UK, France, Australia, Canada, more Western markets that saw short-term rental adoption really early on. They've seen large growth in professional property management as well, and where they've started to see pushback in terms of regulation in a lot of the major cities. So those type of markets, we're now seeing growth anywhere from like 2 to 7%. So very mature growth rates. And then you sort of contrast that with areas like um, maybe Brazil, which is still seeing 30, 40% growth rates for short-term rentals. And we could go through most countries in South America that are seeing similar, whether it's Argentina, Chile, Peru, very strong growth. We're seeing really strong adoption in the Asia Pacific region, whether it be South Korea, Japan, Thailand, Indonesia. We say, and Bali is one of the largest markets for short-term rentals, very strong adoption. Also through the Middle East, the fastest growing city in the world today for short-term rentals is Dubai. We're seeing massive investment from that country from the royal family into bringing tourism into that market for a lot of Middle Eastern countries trying to diversify their economies and moving less dependent on oil revenues and more dependent on the service economy and getting tourism to come in. So yeah, it's and you can look at Eastern Europe, still really strong growth, absent what we're seeing in Ukraine for obvious reasons. But yeah, it's I mean, there's so many countries around the world that are really seeing strong adoption. They're really seeing maybe Eastern or Western tourists, like from the US, the UK, France, exploring new areas around the world, but also people within those countries using it for domestic travel.
When you say that you see market growth in terms of 30% or more in
Mhm.
cities like South America or Dubai, when you're saying the highest growth, you're talking about the number of properties or beds being listed on those platforms, or you're talking about also the demand for this type of accommodation. How much is this impacting the average daily rates, occupancy rates since 2019? Do you see any major disruption?
Yeah, and you absolutely see disruption. Um, those high growth rates, we're really seeing across the board, both on supply, demand, and growth through the major listings. So, like for example, over the past year, in Brazil, we've seen about 28% growth in available listings, and which is arguably pretty high, but we've seen about a 47% increase in nights stayed. So we're actually through 2025 seeing more demand being added into this market than we're seeing supply being added. And over that period, and we've seen a 6% rise in overall occupancy. So even though, and we're seeing this massive increase of 30% more listings over the past 12 months here than the previous 12 months, and those listings are being absorbed and they're not keeping up with the demand that's coming into that market.
Understood. So basically, you don't measure the number of users of the platform, but the number of nights being demanded, right? So in this
Yeah.
case, there's still more demand than offer of properties.
Yeah, and that's a great thing to point out. So we're tracking every listing. And then we're tracking whether that listing is booked or it's unoccupied. And so we don't know how many people are actually staying in each of these listings, how many guests. We know roughly how many they accommodate, the number of bedrooms, baths, things like that. But we're essentially tracking how many times are these listings getting booked. And then out of the total nights that they make themselves available, what percentage of those nights are getting booked, and that's the occupancy level. So a typical listing in Brazil is getting booked about 44% throughout the year. So just under half the nights it's being made available, it's getting booked. So if you think about a week with 7 nights, you're getting booked 3 or 4 nights during that week. Yeah.
Let's go a little bit deeper on Brazil. We have quite a large base of members in Brazil, and they're very curious to know these kind of numbers. Uh, how do you compare this 44% occupancy rate with Brazil with other markets, either more mature markets or similar markets?
Yeah, and it's definitely less than we see in some of the mature markets. So, for example, in all of Europe, an average listing runs about 56%. In North America, and it's roughly the same in the US, it's about 55%. Um, uh, in Australia, we see about 56%. So really average in a lot of the mature markets is in mid 55, mid 50% occupancy. So that's where I see there's still a long way to potentially go for host in South America to continue to grow occupancy in their listings. One of the things that we see can be most sort of impactful for hosts is using dynamic pricing softwares. So typically for a host, you're pretty good at knowing when are the top seasons. Like when are
Mhm.
people coming? Let me
Yes.
raise my rate because we're getting booked and I want to make sure I get paid and during those high demand periods. But where we see and not enough sort of management of rates is on the low season when bookings are not coming in and that people are cutting their rates to attract more demand into their properties. Where someone might have made the trip if the listing was a little bit cheaper and that they're not necessarily making that change. Yeah.
I see. I see. And your software, just to understand very quickly, just I'm just curious, does it change automatically the price for you if you allow the software, or you need to have a kind of be monitoring the software in order to change price? Because this is very interesting. We have seen some operators here. It's a game changer indeed. You're right.
Mhm.
Knowing how to price, that makes a big impact in the bottom line for sure.
Yeah, and our software does not do sort of automatic pricing of listings. We do for any listing provide suggested prices. So like what you could be or should be renting out for your unit on any given night.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can show you like what your competitors are pricing at on those nights. Are your competitors booked or are they not booked? Um, and we can bring in all your data for that comparison. So we find that very helpful in terms of understanding,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and what is the seasonality pattern? Like in Brazil, we typically see like low season in April and May. We see really stronger bookings through December, January. So making sure when you do get into the low season that and seeing what your competitors are sort of priced at, whether they're getting booked at those rates or not, and then how much demand do we expect to come in,
Mm-hmm.
and at the rate that you're at, like what is your likelihood to actually get booked? And that's where we see and people that are paying attention to the data and can meaningfully increase their occupancy,
Yes.
meaningfully increase their rates compared to their competition.
When I saw AirDNA first time, it reminded me of one thing that makes me very puzzled. The airlines price, the way they set up their price. I travel quite a lot and I try to always find the best rates, and it's difficult to figure out. They have a very sophisticated way to track that, and depending on the number of people that search on that date, depending on events, on seasons, on historical data. Uh, am I right to assume that's pretty similar, what you guys do?
Yeah, and it's all sort of built around models on like what is the demand, what is the lead time, how far in advance are people typically booking, how does the sort of booking pace today compare to prior years,
Hmm.
how does it compare to other months, and then I think really importantly, like how is your competition getting booked, and what rate should you be charging to maximize your revenue? Because ultimately,
Yes.
and what the airlines are trying to do, and airlines actually kind of have it easy, right? Is they might have 300 seats on a plane, and anyone on that same plane could be paying a different rate. Like if you're renting out a home, you got one home that you're renting out.
Hmm.
You cannot sort of fill that house with like 20 different people that want to stay there. Like you're setting one rate, and if someone books it, and if you priced it too low, then you're in trouble
Hmm.
potentially.
Yeah,
Where if a plane sort of lets and one and sort of seat get booked too low, then they've got 299 other that they can sell and sort of make up for it.
absolutely. A very good comparison. Now, I don't know if you have this information, but let's imagine I'm sitting now in São Paulo city and I
Mhm.
want to buy a property to put on the market for Airbnb, for example. Do you know what's the best property, the most popular property on Airbnb at the moment? Is it a studio, one bedroom apartment, two bedrooms, three bedrooms? Where is the biggest demand and the best price? Do you have this kind of information?
Yeah, so actually in our platform, you can go in and search any city around the world and see that sort of information.
All right.
And Sao Paulo is one of the markets that we track. And so absolutely, like we can come in and see that. So just as a sort of level set, there are 30,000 active listings in Sao Paulo today. And that's up about 30%, 35% compared to last year. And if we go back to, let's say, May of 2022, so 3 years ago, we were sitting at just 12,000. Uh,
Wow.
so there's been a really significant increase in the number of listings in that market. It is dominated by single bedroom studio, one bedroom listings, make up 84% of overall inventory. Um, almost all of those are entire home. So you're renting out the entire place, though
Hmm.
about 12% of inventory is private rooms. And then what's really interesting for me for a market like Sao Paulo is still most of the listings, and 57% are rented out less than 180 days throughout the year. So it is not necessarily full-time investors sort of bringing in inventory. It's people renting it out more part-time, not doing it full-time. So if we look at listings that were made available almost the entire year, so more than 10 months or more, it's only about 24% of the inventory. So if we think about that 30,000 listings, maybe only 7 or 8,000 of them are actually dedicated full-time short-term rentals.
Is there any chance that this number is showing that way because they have been activated less than 12 months, or this is already contemplating that? Because for people living in São Paulo, the feeling is that there's so many studios coming to the market now, and the market is growing,
Mhm.
and that would be a major shift of impressions that people would have here if they're sitting in the city.
Yeah, no, that could actually be absolutely be part of the reason why so many um but it does hold, like if we go back through prior years too, looking at sort of 12-month periods, that it is, and it's very typical for large cities too, where a lot of people are doing it more part-time. Uh,
Hmm.
there's a lot of people moving in and out. There's
Yes.
people that have homes that maybe their parents sort of live in part of the year, or they travel into town and they want to be able to make it available. And when they're not using it, they want to rent it out, but they can't sort of dedicate it to a long-term rental. Sort of something you're
Yes.
renting out for the full year. You need that sort of option and to have it when you need it and
Mhm.
not have it sort of occupied by someone full time.
Jamie, considering everything you have saw in terms of short-term rentals in different markets, what would be your forecast for Brazil? We have a lot of studios coming to the market, and in one hand, we have people saying, "Look, it's gonna be okay. There is plenty of demand for Airbnb in Brazil, even if we double the inventory right now." And there's another group of people saying, I worry about the level of demand when it comes to the amount of new studios that are coming here. You probably saw maybe London 10 years ago, how it was, how it became, Paris, New York, more mature markets, which one day is going to be probably the case of São Paulo and other capitals in Brazil. What would be your bet?
Yeah. And if you look at sort of the ratio of short-term rentals in Brazil, and so let's say right now there's and 215, 220 million people in Brazil. There's roughly, let's say 450,000 listings. And then compare that to the United States, where there's 340 million people and roughly 1.7 million listings. So that ratio is there's way more listings to per person in the US, like 3x the number of times than in Brazil. And you do that same sort of thing in the UK and a lot of other mature markets. And it's just sort of night and day how much opportunity Brazil still has to sort of grow their inventory, to grow their demand. And then you also compare it to like in housing units, hotels, other forms of accommodation. Like in the US, short-term rentals to total housing units still less than 1%. I suspect that's absolutely true in Brazil as well. And there's just not enough hotel accommodation for the areas that people are looking to travel to. So as more and more people try short-term rentals, see them as affordable options for stays in these areas, it sort of pushes demand. And then as more and more people sort of see the earnings that people are sort of generating, then they add more supply. And we are in this cycle now in Brazil
Mm-hmm.
where there's a lot of demand coming in and people are seeing these units getting booked, so they're adding more in. And I suspect we do start to see getting into the forecast period of growth slowing down over the next 2 years. But I think we still have another 1 or 2 years of double digit, probably 15, 20% growth until we get into maybe 2028, 2029 of slowing growth where you start to reach some of the ratios that some of the other mature countries have, and growth starts to slow a bit.
Under these numbers and this scenario, am I right to assume that there is a tendency for us to have more professional companies operating in markets like São Paulo, or do you think this still gonna be very much dominated by individuals that have one or two apartments and they will be running by themselves these apartments?
Yeah, and what we see is as countries mature in terms of their listings and that as more and more professional managers like they do a few, then they add a few more as they start to add more inventory that really starts to compound over time. Like if you look at Brazil, there are only like 10 operators with more than 500 listings in the entire country,
Wow, that's
uh, which is not a lot. Like 500 listings is like the size of like a large hotel room. So the fact that we only have like 10 of those in the entire country of Brazil, like is pretty, I think, pretty shocking in terms of how few large professional operators there are. And you go to a market like the United States, and just as a comparison, like there's like over like 75 or 80 operators with more than 50 listings or 500 listings. Um, so there's a lot of opportunity for professionalization to happen. You would expect it to happen as the market sort of matures more and more. You go to a market like France, where short-term rentals have been part of their and the way the French travel for years. Um, like during July and August, the country shuts down. Everyone goes down to the south of France, and then you see very high seasonality. You see companies and really large companies that sort of manage tens of thousands of listings. And because they've sort of gotten good at it, they've built out processes that scale. They can acquire new owners relatively easily because all their friends use them. That is something that you would expect to happen in Brazil. And what's interesting is what we don't see throughout the world, even in some of these more mature countries, is ownership start to professionalize. Like even with the large property management companies, they're still just taking on listings from individual owners. So it's you that might own a second home in the mountains or on the coast that you use for trips. And then you want to hire someone to manage it. It's not that you're going and buying, or there's a significant number of people growing 5, 10, 15, and 500 listings. It's mostly, almost entirely individual owners sort of having one or two properties that they then use occasionally and rent out when they're not.
Interesting. Now let's talk about Europe. How do you compare the performance of cities like Lisbon, Paris with New York, for example?
Yeah. So a lot of these major cities have all seen really significant legislation come in over the past few years. And in New York, it's been illegal to operate a short-term rental for decades. That did not stop the growth from happening until really about 2.5 years ago, when new legislation came in that really outlawed any stays less than 28 days in a home in New York. And that caused an 80% decline in overall short-term rental listings. We went from roughly 25,000 available listings down to about 3,000,
Wow.
essentially overnight. Uh, Paris has taken an entirely different approach, and a lot of European cities have done this as well. Even some US cities like San Francisco have done it, where we're not going to say you can't do it. We're just going to limit the number of days that you can make your unit available. So whether it's 90, 120, 180 days, like you're allowed to rent it out occasionally. And you can get a license to do that. We're going to track and make sure that you're limiting yourselves to those number of days. But that allowed, like for a city like Paris that hosted the Olympics last year, that they were able to see a 40% increase in listings during the Olympics to help accommodate all those people coming into the country. And then essentially overnight, most of those listings went away. Um, and we've seen that in Brazil hosting the World Cup, the Olympics, where they were able to add and sort of remove listings accordingly. Airbnb is now the official accommodation sponsor for the Olympics, for the World Cup. So that's something that they've seen, and major events are really a sweet spot for them, of cities that want to host these big international type things. And it's really great for cities to be able to accommodate more people without having to build hotels. Like if you remember back, like and the sort of ghost cities that were developed for like the Sochi Olympics in Russia, where you had all these buildings built, then the Olympics went away and they essentially sat empty
Yes.
and went into disrepair. Like no city wants that now. They want to host these big international events, but they don't want to overbuild. They don't want to overspend. Don't want to lose a ton of money. So short-term rentals are a perfect marriage for a lot of these cities.
Perfect. Let's talk about India for a minute. Do you have data on India? Is how strong is this market in India at the moment? Because we see a lot of growth in different asset classes in India, and I wonder how is the short-term rental market happening in India at the moment?
Yeah, India is still a very, at least on Airbnb and Vrbo, a emerging market. Like there's only about 75,000 listings in total in India. So you compare that with the 450,000 in Brazil and look at the population ratios, you're like, oh wow, there's a long way to go still in India. And even like when we look at the listings, like yes, and like 75,000 might seem like not seem like much, but that's probably even still over counting the number of listings, since a lot of people sort of list both private rooms and entire homes sort of separately.
I see.
Because private rooms are really popular in a lot of the Indian markets. And Airbnb is a unique platform that actually makes those type of units available to rent. So you look at most cities in India, we're looking at like 25, 30, or 40% of the overall inventory is private rooms, which is much different than we see in other cities. So it is seen as a low cost option. And while a growing hotel industry, still not, and just all the accommodations that we see in a lot of other more developed areas. So short-term rentals can feed that option, but it's is a long way continue for growth.
Like many things in India. Jamie, I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. It was great to get your insights and your vision on such an exciting market. And if anyone is watching this and would like to be in touch with AirDNA, how can they do that?
Yeah, so and our website is www.airdna.co, .co. And check it out. We've got a free blog. You can create a free account to get sort of high level data on the market, and subscribe if you want to dig deeper. And then we've got free tools so you can put in your address, any city, any home around the world. We'll find comps are comparable properties and help show you what we think you could earn in that market. So really great set of free tools. And then as you get further along your investment journey, that you can subscribe to sort of do deeper underwriting and get comfortable with those type of investments.
Fantastic. Jamie, thank you very much. Speak to you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.